Good afternoon, folks, and thanks so much for having me at the Wisconsin Retail Conference. And I'm here and always happy to talk about food halls, but in particularly happy to talk to my friends and colleagues in Wisconsin. Um, big fan of the state, big fan of Milwaukee. Have family out there, have friends out there, have been fortunate enough to play golf out at Kohler, and you've got a wonderful state, and please please keep it wonderful. And I always think the best way to do that is to create really great food and beverage options. So today, I have three panelists that are probably known to most of you in Milwaukee. We have Cindy Schaefer of Schaefer Development. She's the president of Schaefer Development. And Cindy and Schaefer are the developers of the Mequon Town Center, which has a thriving food hall. And we also have Tim Gochman, the managing director of Crossroads Real Estate Development. I'm sorry, New Land Enterprises, and New Land and Tim have developed the successful Crossroads and the Crossroads Market. And finally, we have Omar Sheikh, partner in the Surge Restaurant Group, and Surge is almost ready to unveil its 3rd Street Food Hall that has taken a break, like so many in development, as a result of the pandemic that we're all experiencing. So good afternoon, folks. Because I'm on a split screen, I can't see all of you, but I hope you're able to hear me.
Yes, good afternoon, Phil.
Hi, Phil.
Cindy, Tim, Omar.
I texted Omar, told him to share his audio and video if he can.
Okay. I'm apologizing to everyone if you can hear me, just because I'm not able to get right now. I'm not able to get any audio from anyone else.
Can you hear me and Cindy?
Any luck?
We can hear you fine. Here comes Omar. Can you hear us?
I can now. All right. Terrific.
Looks like I'm good.
Okay. Omar, we can hear you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, terrific. And if I've got Cindy and I've got Tim and I've got Omar, then we can certainly go forward. And anyone listening, we do have some slides, and I'll mention the slide notes right now. But a little about your moderator, for what it's worth. I am an executive and managing director of the Specialty Food, Beverage, and Entertainment group within Cushman and Wakefield. My team has consulted on more than 40 food halls around the United States and into Canada and Puerto Rico. I am also fortunate enough to be an adjunct professor at the Culinary Institute of America. And for a little bit of local color, I am a founding board member of the MKE Food School, as well as a national advisor. And we'll be showing you a quick slide on that. And that's a TBA group that has been formed by my colleague and fellow Milwaukeean, Andy Siaka. But for right now, I want to talk to our panel about their experience with food halls, and in particular, where they see food halls going in both the near future as well as in the next 5 years, because our team has an awful lot of research done on this nationally. and we have some pretty strong opinions about it, but my opinions mean nothing. It's the people who have their feet on the ground, their boots on the ground, whose opinions matter. So, Cindy, I want to start off with you and ask you to tell me, as a developer, what was the inspiration that led you to make Mequon Town Center?
Yeah, actually, it's the Mequon Public Market, and it's part of Spurs. Yes, which is a 14-acre site in Mequon, Wisconsin. Our inspiration was really to save and restore the old public works buildings that were built in the 1940s. And so that was the impetus for us to put a market on this site. In addition, it's a very attractive amenity for our 156 residents that live here on site.
And why the market? I mean, that was that a risk? Was that something that you'd done some underwriting on? When we look at food hall development, we usually take a pretty deep dive into market conditions. What did you do that led you to the decision to do the food hall?
We did a significant amount of research, and one of our main drivers was the fact that there were not a lot of an extensive amount of food and beverage options in the Mequon area, and we felt that there was a high demand, and that's proved to be the case with many of our vendors at the market.
Did you take inspiration from your design from anywhere in particular?
Of course, we used Engberg Anderson was our architectural firm, and they also traveled extensively. I believe they're doing some food hall work in Texas, or they were. So they were extremely helpful in helping us put together the design of the Mequon Public Market. Okay.
And is it working for you? Because we're going to get into a conversation about the economic model. But now that you've been through it for a while, do you feel like you picked the right economic model for your vendors? Is it working for you? Is it working for them?
Well, I think, as you know, through COVID, we've had some fallout with several of our vendors, which was understandable given the conditions. Most of them had other to focus on their primary locations. But I was surprised we put Marty Noel went out to market with our vacant spaces, and we had over 20 people that were interested in the space, and we were able to release our vacant spaces rather quickly. So our vendors that fared the best were the ones that stayed open during COVID and were able to do delivery.
So that's trending directly with the research that our group has done. For those listening and those are interested in this economic model, we found that 80% of the food halls that we track, and we track well over 250 of them, 80% of them have remained open in the U.S. During COVID. Their sales, of course, have taken a hit, but they have been able to take their proverbial pivot for the most part because of the enhancement in pickup and delivery. And it turns out that the food hall, by its nature, works pretty well in that regard, so long as the food hall is not designed to service a very specific office community, because most of the office communities, as you know, have been depleted. Tim, we talked yesterday about Crossroads, and what I found really interesting about Crossroads and your decision to open it was less about the decision to open it, but more about the decision to self-manage. Our background tells us that self-managing a food hall is pretty tough. Tell us how you came to that decision, and tell us sort of what it's done for you in terms of your thinking about food halls going forward.
Well, the decision was based primarily on a lack of food halls, and therefore lack of food hall expertise in Milwaukee. prior to Crossroads, we had Sherman Phoenix open, but not a pure food hall. And prior to that, really, we didn't have anything. And so that's one of the issues, I think, is operating in a market where you don't have that depth of experience like you would in a Chicago or another larger market. And so we thought about bringing in an outside firm, whether it be for a consulting basis or even operational basis. But given the lessons we've learned from the real estate development side, I think it's tough for Chicago developers to come into Milwaukee and get it right. And I didn't really see how they would be able to come into a food hall and get it right. So we decided to do it ourselves, which has been an interesting learning experience. I would not recommend it for most people. I'm not even sure I recommend it for myself. But it's a way to learn. And overall, I think we've done a pretty good job of it. I mean, we just actually, one of our vendors that did a pop-up signed a 2-year extension. So the team is performing. It takes a lot. I will tell you that it takes a lot. The programming, the recruitment, management, it's intensive.
It's we've seen that, and I tip my hat to you for taking on, the unknown, right? Because unless you've got experience managing multiple food and beverage units, it's pretty tough to do. I'll also throw at you that the other person in Milwaukee who told me that the Chicago folks just didn't get it, was the great Dave Sobelman, of Sobelman's bar, who does those brilliant Bloody Marys and the architectural constructs that are on top of them. So I took from that, and from speaking to you, that food halls, we've always believed that food halls, as a general rule, were celebrations of local and regional culture and cuisine. And while there are groups out there that are, trading on the idea of taking some sort of national names and bringing them out through a food hall model, and we'll talk in a bit about what the economic model that I'm speaking of really is. But Omar, you've got the tiger by the tail. You've got a food hall that's opening soon.
So I don't think Omar's on.
My research has 12 stalls and a bar and a gaming area. What was your philosophy going into it in terms of curating its Milwaukee-ness? How did you plan to do it?
Phil, I don't think Omar's on. He keeps getting booted off.
Okay, we're getting an Omar. All right. So Omar's not on. Well, what I can tell you is that hopefully, like a good moderator, I did research what Omar was trying to do with the 3rd Street project, and what I saw, and I wish he was here because I'd love to talk about it with him, is that he seemed to focus on the big bar and the sort of 12 or so food vendors. And what I did want to know in that environment is sort of square footage, because we take a hard look when we're evaluating food halls at the appropriate mix of vented vendors, non-vented vendors, bar, and what we usually call programming areas. You can call them entertainment areas, or you can call them common space, but that's kind of the way we work it. So for the folks that are listening, I have never, I've written a number of research pieces on the food hall movement. We refer to it as a movement because it is much more than simply a fad or sort of this week's news. it's become a movement because of the economic hedge that it provides to both the developer and to the vendor, as well as providing a hedge to the consumer, who can find a number of different cuisines and a number of different experiences, hopefully under one roof. Now I say that, and Tim, let me go to you. Was the thought process as deep as all that, and should it be as deep as all that? Meaning, did you believe, our theory about the hedge for the developer is that in an environment where even during the most successful years of our economy, we saw over 20% of restaurants fail to make it through year one. And that in all of our analyses of food halls throughout the United States, we've only seen a handful close. And I'll tell you why we saw them close. But for the most part, you don't get dark space. Now, that's my opinion. Do you share that opinion, or do you challenge it? I'm happy to hear somebody who's, again, boots on the ground versus my ivory tower here.
So let me see if I can summarize that question. So is the question that if I lost the first part, whether that much thought should go into it, and whether we see this as a viable economic model versus traditional restaurants. And Omar's back on, and so we can I think we can go back to Omar's food hall. But Omar, prior to food halls, also had a good amount of experience in brick and mortar restaurants. And so Omar, you can agree with me or disagree with me, but within Newland's retail portfolio, we've got Justin Carlisle with his Ardent, which is one of the best restaurants in Wisconsin in the country. But also he's got a couple of casual concepts. And my understanding is that in the last decade or so, the margins in the restaurant business have just plummeted. And people have been working on thin margins for a long time, and it's not sustainable. And so, to the degree that a food hall can bring those costs down for operators, or at the very least de-risk those operations, then yes, that is absolutely a benefit that the food hall needs to bring to the vendors.
Hold on, maybe this will put me back there, but even when I get on it, just keep.
Go ahead, Omar. Go ahead.
And does it also serve as a hedge for you as the developer? Are you less worried that you're going to have a dark space?
Yeah, unquestionably, right? So, one of the things we talked about in the prep is that the whole idea of the food hall model is that you're taking a chunk of the infrastructure, the build out, and you're putting it on the property owner, typically the real estate developer. And because developers are financing the building, that is a lower risk and therefore lower interest rate than what a business operator, a restaurant operator is typically borrowing through the SBA. You might be in the high singles to low to mid double-digit interest rates, which is more than double versus my borrowing costs. So that alone should bring operational costs down, and hopefully we're able to pass those through to the operators. And if we're able to pass those through, and if we're creating an environment where they can operate instead of a full-scale restaurant with a 30, 40 person staff, they can run a food hall stall essentially like a food truck, 4, 5, 6 people. Then yes, absolutely, that makes their life easier. If you make someone's life easier and you remove the barriers to entry, then you get a bigger pool of people, and the financial model makes sense. You get more willing people, and so yes, we have been able to, as a result, backfill spaces in a very short amount of time as we get that natural turnover in the stalls.
And again, that's great from my perspective to hear that it's it's trending with the national research that we're doing. That's what we're seeing nationally. And Omar, are you back on? We got you?
No, he's been on and off.
All right. Well, if Omar comes back on, I hope he'll interrupt me. But Cindy, how did you go about the important task of management? So, and before you answer, we usually stick with the sort of, we think there are 4 pillars to a successful food hall project. And the first is design, meaning that it has to be able to accommodate these different vendors and accommodate the public. Second is management. Third is overall programming of the space. And fourth, oddly enough, is the food. Fourth is the vendors. Tim talked about the challenges of managing the space. Does your group self-manage, or does your group have a third party that assists?
We have a third party, but it's been a combination of us with a third party managing it. And you know, one of our goals that we felt was very important with our public market was really an experience. You know, experiential real estate is something that people really wanted. Now with COVID, that's kind of slowed that down a bit. But we had a music series that was sponsored by Johnson Financial. We had a art mural installation that was sponsored by Frederick Hospital. So we really we do pop-ups for the high school at no charge. So we're really trying to make it a community space and a benefit to our community as well as our residents that live here. But I think that the tenant mix is very important. And just, we kind of looked at, you know, morning, noon, evening business. You know, we have Anodyne Coffee that opens early in the morning. And then we have several vendors that are open for lunch throughout the evening. So Screaming Tuna has Little Tuna here in Mequon. They've done extremely well in our market. Cafe Zone, Santorini Grill. We haven't had any Greek food out here. In addition, we've got Purple Door Ice Cream. We've got Aloha Poke coming in. We just recently had the falafel guys come in, and now we have Pizza Man that's going to be opening soon as well. And then we have one non-food vendor, which is La Terra Floral, and that's been really fun. She's done extremely well with gifts and flowers and doing classes, small size classes on floral design. So we're really trying to have an experience above and beyond the food experience as well.
Well, that's great if you can pull that off through programming. We have been, again, consistently, our research tells us that the prepared food offerings and, you know, the bar and the beverage programs do a consistently better revenue stream than smaller retail, or what you might think of as, you know, produce or cheesemongers or meat. Obviously, a food hall is not exactly, you know, a central market. There's usually dominant on the prepared foods component, and that's because that's what the consumer wants. And I think it's very important. Well, that's what the consumer has demonstrated that it wants. And we've seen time and time again where if you dedicate the same amount of space to any type of retail that has a lower check average or that is not for immediate consumption, you're going to have a different revenue model. And that's why we focus, and that sounds like why you're all focusing on programming the food hall, meaning that, you know, if you're going to have days where you've got farmers markets, that's great, but you can't, it's more than great, it's important, but you can't do that every day and dedicate all that space to it, or you're not going to make the revenues that you need to justify the investment that you made.
We have one retail vendor by design, and what's been nice about that is when people are waiting for food, because we're not always fast food, then there's something for them to do. So it's worked out well for our concept.
I think it's brilliant, because to me that's a great example of programming, as opposed to simply leasing space. I think it's a fantastic example. How do you, Tim, and I'm going to presume Omar still isn't with us. Tim, how did you go about approaching vendors with an economic model? And what I mean about that is, we know that there are traditional leases out there where there's a base rent for in exchange for a certain amount of square footage, and certain responsibilities are imputed through a legally binding lease document. And there are also license arrangements in which a vendor is occupying space pursuant to an agreement which simply allows that vendor to operate its business in an environment that belongs to someone else through an enforceable license agreement. Tim, which of those models did you take, and why?
Yeah, we went with the license agreement, which is, a nuanced difference versus a standard lease. And it's just due to the nature of operating within a shared space. But I actually want to go back to this interesting point that was made about the hierarchy of importance of decision making.
Yeah.
I want to tap Cindy for some answers. So if I recall correctly, you said the first is space design, and then events management, and then food. Cindy, I think your experience is somewhat similar to ours. What would you say the split is between residential, so right, people coming from their house, versus people coming from work pre-COVID?
Pre-COVID? Well, our food hall opened before we finished our residential units. So it was probably more of an 80-20 in the beginning. And I'd say now it's much higher than that, probably 60-40.
60 residential?
Right.
Or 60? I mean, yeah, you're still in Mequon, right? It's a predominantly residential community.
Right.
And I think that's an important point that's not in these four, in terms of figuring out what type of food hall you want to run and whom it caters to. We had, I don't know if you can call it a food hall. I guess you start getting into the nitty gritty of what's a food hall, what's a market, what's a hybrid, et cetera. But you've got this 4-vendor food hall that was at the Pabst, and it's a difficult location. It doesn't have the scale. It doesn't have the programming. Cindy, obviously, you've got a lot of public space. You guys do a lot of programming. Crossroads does programming through its adjacent attractions like Black Cat Alley and the Milwaukee Film Festival, and so on and so forth. And I think that's a really, for the people listening in on the panel, the details of how to operate it are going to come much later. First, you have to decide what kind of thing you want to set up. And so I think, Cindy, you've got, how big is Mequon Public Market? What's the square footage overall?
We're about 15,000 square feet.
Yeah, you guys are double our size, right? Crossroads is 7,000 square feet, and we've got 8 vendors and 2 bars packed into that 7,000 square feet. Your distribution is different. How many total vendors?
We have 10 vendors.
Yeah, so.
And we have a test performance kitchen on our upper level that we lease out.
And I think that's, talking about those 4 things: the space design, the Tom Dakin is asking, what is the 4-vendor food hall that I mentioned? It's at the Pabst. I don't even know what street it's on. It's called like 1125 or something like that. But the space design, the events, the management, the food, I don't see them in an order. I see them as equally important. Crossroads, we used Corbin Associates for the design. It swept the IIDAs and ASID award categories. The management has to be top notch. And I don't know if it's specific to Milwaukee, but I feel like it's different from Chicago. You just have to execute on every single category. And if you don't, my feeling is at Crossroads, Cindy, chime in, but if you don't execute on each and every category, you get punished.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's kind of evolving. It's changing as we grow.
And that's great to hear, because I like it when people challenge assumptions, right, that we make. And let me amplify that we put those 4 pillars together, and I would tell you that while I feel like I can rank them in terms of importance, I would say that the differences are minimal. And the reason, believe it or not, why we nationally rank food number 4 and vendor curation number 4 is because we have been very happily surprised over the past 4 years that we have found great food and beverage in just about every corner of the United States, from small to mid-size vendors, that has really been surprisingly, happily consistent and of very high quality. And we've not yet found a market, be it as, there are large markets and Milwaukee's a mid-sized market, but we found great food and beverage offerings in Omaha, Nebraska and Fargo, North Dakota, that you wouldn't think would exist. You'd think you might have problems. We have seen what you've seen, which is we've seen the pandemic reduce the number of independent restaurants that exist. And Tim, you made an excellent observation point earlier about the bad, or bad is probably too tough a word. I'd say the really weak economic model of the independent restaurant. And in short, it's left a lot of very talented people with culinary backgrounds effectively without businesses or without opportunities. And we see the prospect of the food hall-like development, which is really an amenity at the end of the day, right, as something that the developer can use as a signature for their projects. And it's clear that each of you have taken on a very personal partnership with the food and beverage that's in your space. Is it hard to just look at it as just, okay, do you think it's just the amenity of the day? Or is this an amenity that you see growing? And Cindy, I'll start with you. Are there going to be more food halls or fewer food halls?
That's a good question, Phil. I don't know, Tim, I think you agree with me. It's difficult. It's a challenging business, especially in the current times. I do think it makes sense from an economic standpoint, as low barriers of entry for people to get started and to get a concept going. So I would anticipate that we're going to see a growth in food halls and markets. But again, with these uncertain times, it's just hard to predict. Tim, what are your thoughts?
Well, you have to be, I agree. Overall, I agree. And I think you have to be cognizant of what market you're in. I mean, Milwaukee only has so much density. And at the end of the day, a food hall does rely on density. With Crossroads, we've been lucky. I traveled the country looking at different food hall models in Chicago, in New York, in Denver, and Seattle. There are food halls, Phil, as you know, like Revival in Chicago. Which is in kind of that South Loop area. And so it's not active on evenings and weekends because there's no residential base.
That's right.
Whereas, if you go to like an Avanti in Denver, it's in this area that has heavy residential behind it, but it's close to the commercial district. And Cindy, that's why I asked you about that, business to residential mix. But right, your business crowd is typically your lunch crowd, and Your residential crowd is more so your evening crowd. And so I think the answer is it depends on where. Cindy, the other thing I'm curious about, one of the things that's a little bit different between Crossroads and Mequon Public Market, I think, is that we built a commissary kitchen, and so our spaces are not individually vented. Yours are, right? Correct.
Yes.
And if you're not willing to share this, sorry for asking a detailed question, but how does it work in your model in terms of what the vendor's responsible for build out, and how big is that ticket to start? Because for us, I'll share, right? For us, the initial setup can be anywhere from, let's say, $15,000 to $20,000. They're bringing in their own equipment. So we provide a hood, we provide a line, and they get a designated section under that line. We provide refrigeration, shelving, storage, etc., cleaning products. We even provide the dishwasher, both the equipment and the person. So they're just bringing their cooking equipment, knives, pots, pans, plates, and signage. They have to worry about the aesthetics in the stall. So we estimate that at 15 to 25 on the high end. How does it work for you?
Well, one of the things we did, and because we were able to do it more economically, as you pointed out earlier, is we paid for the hoods and the venting, which was the major expense. And because of the way our project was financed, we had a HUD 221D4 loan. So we had 40-year fixed rate non-recourse financing at, 4% sounded good at the time, but so we were able to.
It still is.
Yeah, it is.
To do it much more economically. And the other thing is we had really good vendors, like George Morales, who owns Cafe Corazon, was a huge help to us. I mean, he really helped us with our build out, and he brought in his people to help us. And, if it wasn't for him, I don't think we'd have the public market. So George and Wendy from Cafe Corazon were very helpful to us, and we had a lot of experienced vendors, Matt from Anodyne Coffee and Spiro from Santorini Grill, and obviously Purple Door. So we had a lot of experienced vendors, that really helped us out. And we're really excited to have Pizza Man coming in. They're going to open next month, and they're going to sell pizza by the slice. And we think that'll be a huge, huge boon to them.
It's great that we've got two different approaches to the food hall, to what we would consider to be the guts, the back of the house, how you are going to set your project up for the vendors. And those are really the two most independent schools of thought currently in play. I would say the majority of the food halls that we see are independent stalls that have not just hoods, but have just about all of the equipment that's required for a turnkey operation in each stall. The idea of a shared kitchen, again, I think it requires a good bit of operational oversight. It's not a right or wrong model. It's a model. And fortunately, I think for what you've described, Tim, you took an approach that the vendors can still be independent. And we find that no matter which model you use, as long as you've got a group of independent vendors, you are spreading out the labor costs of all of them, and that's very important. And B, you are not creating an environment that is inauthentic, meaning it's not one group that is dropping 12 to 15 different concepts out on the public. And one thing I will tell all is the one common thread that we have seen in food hall failure, and there haven't been that many, have been the single operator model, where they have attempted out of one kitchen, one group presenting 12 different items, maybe one or two of which they were well known for, but that they didn't have any constituency for others. And frankly, it took the soul out of the project. And I think the soul, no matter how we dive into the economics, the soul is pretty important to the development and to the concept of the real estate that you are trying to enhance. So you're both doing great things, brilliant things. I hope that some of the listeners have questions for you. Have we heard anything yet from our audience? Because to have these two developers who have become experts in food hall curation, management, and operation through their own sweat is pretty unique.
While people are thinking of that, and I'm watching the chat, but I'll address the earlier question of, do we get more food halls or fewer food halls? And Cindy, I'm going to take it in a different direction. I want to hear your opinion on this too. One of the things that, so the person that turned me onto food halls in the first place was Kevin Schmaltz, who's probably listening, maybe not. Kevin's probably tired of hearing me talk about this, but I think a lot of this is inspiration. You have to go and you have to learn and you have to take the best of what's available out there. And we certainly did that. And one of the things that I thought wasn't great, wasn't authentic, Phil, was the thing that you mentioned, which is a top-down structure. You see that in Latinicity in Chicago, in the Milk Market in Denver. Yeah, it's one operator, one corporate operator trying to do 12 things. It's a glorified cheesecake factory. And right, you have 97 items on the menu by the same chef. I'm sorry, just people don't do that well. So, and that's where I think the edge is in Milwaukee, is that we are a smaller market and we do have so many great food vendors and we have such a great relationship with food, what Wisconsin Foodie is doing, what the farmers are doing, what the independent restaurateurs are doing. And I think that needs to be leveraged. Now, that being said, do I think there are going to be more food halls? I mean, in the greater Milwaukee area, yes. Do I think that there's room for many more in like city proper to be executed well? No. I think that we're going to oversaturate, which is inevitable for any industry, because people look and they say, oh, well, that works, I'm going to do it too. And then there will be attrition. And the big question that I have is, will there ever come a point in Milwaukee, are we a big enough market that you're going to start getting consolidation? Like, do Cindy and I look at each other and say, I don't want to do this anymore in a single location, like you buy me or I buy you. And then you form a food group that manages this. And that's, that, Cindy, I don't know how you feel about that, number one. Number two, Tracy's asking me to talk about ghost kitchens and what happens to vacant retail as food halls start inevitably impacting brick and mortar restaurants, because that's going to happen, right? And that movement was predicted. I think we talked about it in this panel a year or two ago, where the prediction was made that the middle will be slowly impacted by the food halls, right? Because economically it's different for just a mid-priced restaurant to compete with what food halls are doing. And so you're either going to go to the margins. Either you're doing something that's cheap and you're just doing it at volume and you're not focused on programming and quality of food and all of those things. You're just focused on price, or you're doing something really special like the vendors at Mequon Public Market and Crossroads are doing. And the middle just kind of disappears. And so I don't know what happened with those spaces with ghost kitchens, et cetera. But Cindy, would love to hear your thoughts on what you think the direction is on consolidation and where the market is going with the strata of quality.
Well, again, I mean, our market was really structured as an amenity for our residents. It's not a huge profit center for us, and I think you'd agree with that. But it does add a tremendous amount of value to our residents in our location. To have 10 restaurants in your backyard is great, especially because we're a suburban location. We're not a city location. And I do think that, we will see more food halls, but hopefully in different locations and not just all downtown and in different. I think there's probably room for some in some of the other suburbs, like Greenfield, for example.
Well, I can chime in and tell you this. Our practice has been extremely busy even through COVID. We've signed 12 food hall projects around the country since March 1st. And while today's Wisconsin Day, I think we all have to look to what goes on nationally. And I will tell you what we're seeing. We're seeing food hall economics dictate the decision-making from developers. I'm not sure that it was the food hall that was going to decimate, those middle independent restaurants. I'm a bit of a believer in, in scene making, meaning if we've got a good restaurant scene and good food halls, everybody benefits. And we're seeing a lot of food hall design now, including a standalone restaurant that is either adjacent to the food hall or part of the food hall. And again, we're seeing this on a national basis. We're seeing more food halls that are being designed with ghost kitchen capabilities nationally. And that is becoming more and more common. And lastly, we're seeing food halls that are being designed and developed to incorporate e-gaming locations, which have become extremely popular. Esports, I don't mean gambling, I mean gaming facilities that are attracting leagues, teams, and independent play. So just to tell you what's out there, so we see a growth. I wouldn't call it monster growth, but we're seeing steady growth nationally. And
Bill, how much time do we have left?
Yeah, I received a note that suggests that we are coming up on the 45 minutes, and obviously we'd like to leave the panelists with a minute, if we don't have questions, with a minute to
we do. I've got a couple of questions that popped up in the chat. Cindy, can you see those?
I cannot.
Well, I'll read them off. So one is, how does each market handle delivery? So Cindy, I'll let you address that quick.
The majority of our vendors are using Grubhub, so they're using a third-party delivery service.
Okay. Has that been a significant add-on to the revenue?
Yeah, during COVID, I don't monitor all the sales of all my vendors, but in speaking with Santorini Grill and Little Tuna, they had significant uptick in volume because of that.
So I assume if you're not monitoring sales, that most likely you guys have a rent structure more akin to just retail with some sort of a CAM.
Correct.
Whereas we have a centralized system, and so we see everybody's sales. The vendors don't see each other's; they only see their own. But we can give them kind of macro level feedback on how they're doing relative to others. Sales trends, you're down versus everybody else is up, etc. But for us, delivery, I think delivery's tough for people that are doing good food. Good food just for the most part doesn't travel well. What are your thoughts on that?
We're seeing certainly a better quality in delivery. The bigger issue though is that it makes almost no economic sense for small vendors to pay the fee that accompanies the Grubhubs and the Uber Eats.
So that was one question was on delivery, and then Cindy, I think an interesting one for you is from Alex Zank, and Alex says, what kind of suburban market makes sense for food halls, and what makes Mequon successful, and where can that possibly be replicated?
Well, I think in Mequon it was a matter of supply and demand. We didn't have a lot of restaurants in Mequon, and So I'm hearing from realtors in the area that people are now purchasing homes closer to the public market because they can walk to it. So we've seen some new residential developments come up. We have 156 units. There's another 100 units across the street. You know, I mentioned Greenfield only because I had talked to Scout Yauk, and you know, he had see my, so that might be an area I think that could benefit from a food hall structure.
Yeah, and I know, you know, for the public market, which is food hall on steroids. I have a friend who ran a large digital tech firm, and they wanted their new office. One of the hard criteria was they needed to be within a couple of blocks of the public market so that their employees could walk to lunch, which is awesome to see because it kind of activates.
That follows national trends. We do an awful lot of market research. We do a lot of feasibility studies on both market and design. We see that consistently throughout our research, is that they really do provide a halo effect for the neighborhood.
Cindy, I have a final question for you because I don't see any more in the chat. But if there were a local group or even a national association for food halls, would you join? Would you join and share experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great idea.
There isn't like a trade association, like a food hall trade association. I'm not volunteering. I don't want to do it.
Let's start with.
No, you know what? We've been asked to create one. There were some discussions about it pre-COVID. You know, I certainly hope that, frankly, that an association is developed by those people who have boots on the ground to gain information. But as you know, right, our situation right now is it's information gathering right now is tough because we don't know whether the information is anecdotal information over the last 6 months or whether it's real. But it's my hope that we're going to see at least some association where information is shared, and that's the most important part. I will leave it with this. Couple of insights is that we have two different approaches to the food hall, but both delivering unique, excellent experiences to the citizenry of Milwaukee. The question about whether or not there will be groups that come together to acquire food halls. I'm going to say to you, I don't see it, but what I do see, and I see it consistently and daily, is that there are groups that are being aggressive about offering professional management to food halls on a broad basis. And that's one you should look out for. I would like to leave it there. And I would like to say to anybody listening, please visit Mequon, and please visit Crossroads. I am certain that they will inspire you. We are always available. Our research reports from Cushman and Wakefield are always available to you. And I think that the research reports are drafted in a way that are not pro or con. They do express what we see as growth in the industry. And I'd like to thank the Wisconsin retail teams for asking us to present today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Phil. I'd also like to offer all our CAR members a free public market box. It's a $50 value. So if any of you want to stop by the Spur 16 Clubhouse, we have a free box for you in appreciation of the time that you've given us today. And thank you for supporting the Mequon Public Market.